Ngozi Kayamika had only been married for 3 months, and life in her husband's quiet village felt peaceful, until that night. The air was cool, the moon hidden behind thick clouds, and the smell of boiling yam filled the small kitchen. She hummed softly as she stirred, but then, she stopped. A faint sound reached her ears, like a baby's soft whimper. She frowned, tilting her head. It came again, this time sharper, a tiny cry, muffled yet clear, as though trapped inside the pot. Her heart skipped. She stepped back, clutching her wrapper tightly around her. "No, it can't be," she whispered, shaking her head. Perhaps she was tired, hearing things after a long day. She forced herself to stir the yam again. But the sound grew louder, more urgent, like a child wailing in pain. Her hands trembled. Beads of sweat formed on her forehead despite the cool night breeze. She stared at the pot, her breath quickening. It was impossible, food didn't cry. "Ngozi, food will burn," her husband, Emeka, called from the other room. She swallowed hard. "Emeka, come and hear this," she said, her voice trembling. He walked in, his expression a mix of curiosity and irritation. "Hear what?" "Listen, it's crying," she whispered. Emeka chuckled, shaking his head. He lifted the lid casually, and at once, the sound stopped. Steam rushed out, revealing nothing but soft, perfectly cooked yam. He laughed. "It's just steam making noise. You watch too many stories," he teased. But Ngozi didn't laugh. Her hands still shook. She stared at the pot, her mind racing. She had grown up hearing strange tales from the elders, about food that could speak, pots that could curse, and farmlands that hid secrets. Those were supposed to be just stories. Yet tonight, standing in her small kitchen, she wasn't so sure anymore. When she served the meal, she barely ate, her ears straining for any sound. The yam looked normal, tasted normal, but the echo of that cry lingered deep in her mind, refusing to leave. And somewhere inside, she knew this was not the last time she would hear it. Emeka was sitting in the small living room, listening to the faint hum of the radio, when Ngozi's panicked voice cut through the air. "Emeka, come, please, come now," she called, her tone urgent. He sighed, stood up, and walked into the kitchen, wondering what could be so serious. She stood by the stove, pointing at the pot, her eyes wide with fear. "Listen, can you hear it?" she whispered. He leaned in, a hint of impatience on his face. At first, he heard only the bubbling of water, but then, faintly, a sound like a child's muffled sob drifted out. He frowned, then smirked. "Ngozi, it's just steam escaping. You're letting your imagination run wild," he said, trying not to laugh. But Ngozi shook her head firmly. "No, Emeka, it's a baby's cry. I know what I heard." Her voice trembled. To prove his point, Emeka stepped forward, grabbed the wooden spoon, and stirred the pot slowly. The crying grew sharper, as though protesting. He raised an eyebrow. "You see? Just the water shifting the yam pieces," he said with confidence. Before she could reply, he lifted the lid completely. The sound stopped instantly. Only a rush of hot steam escaped, wrapping their faces in a warm mist. Inside, the yam looked perfectly normal, soft, white, and harmless. Emeka chuckled. "If food could cry, we'd hear it every night," he teased, placing the lid aside. "Now stop worrying and let's eat before it gets cold." But Ngozi's hands remained stiff at her sides, her eyes fixed on the pot as if it might start again. Emeka served himself without hesitation, chatting about the day, unaware of the unease gnawing at her. She forced a smile but took only a small portion, pushing it around her plate instead of eating. In her mind, the silence in the pot wasn't comforting, it was unsettling, as though whatever had been crying was only waiting, hiding until the right moment to make itself heard again. That night, long after Emeka had finished eating and gone to bed, she lay awake, replaying the strange sound over and over in her head, unable to shake the feeling that it had been something real. The morning sun cast a golden glow over Abakaliki's bustling market as Ngozi made her way through the crowded stalls. Women called out prices, children weaved between legs, and the smell of smoked fish and fresh vegetables filled the air. She stopped at Mama Ifeoma's stall, a place she had been visiting since her marriage. The elderly woman, with her deep-set eyes and slow, deliberate movements, was known for selling the freshest yams in the village. As Ngozi picked through the neatly stacked tubers, she laughed softly, shaking her head. "Mama Ifeoma, you will not believe what happened last night," she began, her tone casual. "I was boiling yam, and I heard something strange, like a baby crying inside the pot." She expected a laugh, maybe a playful remark. Instead, Mama Ifeoma's face went completely pale. Her hands froze in midair, the yam she was holding slipping slightly in her grip. "Ngozi," she said slowly, her voice low. "You must never cook food at night without saying the prayer." Ngozi blinked, surprised. "Prayer? For what?" Mama Ifeoma's eyes darted around, as if checking who might be listening. She leaned closer. "Because food remembers. If you cook without calling God's light into it, the food will reveal what it has swallowed." Ngozi frowned. "Swallowed? Mama, it's just yam." The old woman shook her head sharply. "Not all yam is just yam. Some grow where they should not. Some drink what no living thing should drink. At night, when the spirits walk, they speak through what you eat." Her words were quick, urgent. A chill ran down Ngozi's spine. "So, you're saying last night?" "I'm saying thank your God you didn't finish cooking," Mama Ifeoma cut in. "Next time, pray. Or better yet, don't cook after dark at all." Ngozi forced a small nod, trying to smile, but her heart beat faster. She took the yam she had bought and left, glancing back once at Mama Ifeoma, who still stood frozen, watching her go. The noise of the market felt distant now, drowned out by the old woman's warning echoing in her mind. That evening, the sky was heavy with clouds, and the wind rustled the plantain trees outside. Ngozi decided to make beans for dinner, thinking it would be quick and simple. She tried to brush off Mama Ifeoma's warning, telling herself it was just an old woman's superstition. She lit the stove, poured the beans into the pot, and added water. The smell of the cooking beans slowly filled the room, and for a while, everything felt normal. Then, a soft sound rose from the pot, faint at first, almost like the wind sneaking through a crack. Ngozi froze, her spoon suspended in midair. The sound grew clearer, sharper. It was crying again. Only this time, it was louder than the yam had been. Her chest tightened. She stepped closer, her hands trembling, and that's when she heard it, a faint whisper tangled in the cries. "Ngozi." Her heart skipped. She turned quickly, scanning the empty kitchen. The whispers came again, mixed with the wailing, her name drawn out as though from deep underwater. "Ngozi. Ngozi." Her breathing quickened. She backed away from the stove, clutching her wrapper. The pot rattled slightly as if something inside was moving. The smell of the beans, once comforting, now felt suffocating. The voices grew louder, overlapping, whispering and crying in unison, filling the small kitchen with a chilling chorus. "No, no," she muttered, shaking her head. She grabbed the pot with both hands, ignoring the heat biting her palms, and stumbled toward the door. The cries and whispers followed, louder, sharper, almost pleading. She reached the edge of the yard and, with a trembling scream, flung the beans into the dustbin. The sound stopped instantly. Ngozi stood there, chest heaving, sweat clinging to her face despite the cool evening breeze. The silence that followed was heavy, unnatural, as though the whole village was holding its breath. She backed away slowly, wiping her hands on her wrapper. Whatever this was, it was not her imagination. Something was inside the food, something that knew her name. And she felt certain, it wasn't finished with her yet. Emeka came home late that night, smelling faintly of palm wine, and found Ngozi sitting quietly in the corner of the living room. The kitchen smelled faintly of beans, but there was no food on the table. "Where's dinner?" he asked, frowning. She hesitated before telling him what had happened, her voice low, her eyes still wide with fear. She explained how the beans had cried and whispered her name, how she had thrown them away. Emeka stared at her for a moment, then burst out laughing. "Ngozi, you've let those market women fill your head with nonsense," he said. She tried to stop him, but he walked straight to the dustbin outside. Before she could say another word, he pulled out the pot of beans and began eating with his bare hands, the food still warm. "See? Perfectly fine. No spirits, no voices. Just good food you wasted," he said between mouthfuls. She stood frozen, her stomach twisting in dread. He finished most of it, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and tossed the pot aside. "You need to stop believing foolish tales," he muttered, going inside. At first, everything seemed normal. But a few hours later, as they lay in bed, Emeka sat up suddenly, clutching his stomach. His breathing quickened. "Ngozi," he gasped. She turned toward him, startled. His eyes were wide, filled with panic. "I can hear them," he whispered. "Hear who?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Babies, crying, inside me," he groaned. His face twisted in pain, and he clutched his stomach tighter, bending forward. They're screaming so loud." Ngozi's blood ran cold. She tried to hold him, but he pushed her away, stumbling out of bed. He collapsed to the floor, writhing as though something was tearing at him from the inside. The sound of his cries mixed with his desperate gasps filled the room. She knelt beside him, her hands trembling, tears blurring her vision. Whatever had been in that food was now inside her husband. And the worst part was, it had been waiting for him. Ngozi struggled to lift Emeka onto his feet, his weight heavy as he groaned in pain. His face was pale, his lips trembling, and sweat poured down his forehead. Every few seconds, he clutched his stomach and whimpered, "They're crying again," louder. Her heart pounded as she half-dragged, half-carried him out into the dimly lit street. The village was quiet, only the chirping of crickets filling the night. She didn't stop until they reached the outskirts, where the small hut of Chief Okari, the most respected herbalist in Abakaliki, stood. The wooden door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of burning herbs. Chief Okari sat cross-legged on a mat, his eyes sharp and knowing. He looked at Emeka, then at Ngozi, before speaking. "Tell me everything," he said calmly. Through gasps and tears, Ngozi explained. The crying yam, the whispers from the beans, Emeka eating from the dustbin, and now the sounds inside him. The herbalist listened without interruption, occasionally nodding. When she finished, he reached for a small clay bowl, poured water into it, and dropped a handful of crushed leaves inside. He murmured words she couldn't understand, his voice deep and steady. The water in the bowl began to swirl on its own, forming cloudy shapes. Chief Okari's eyes narrowed. "You are victims of a curse," he said gravely. "A curse placed on anyone who eats from a certain farmland." Ngozi's breath caught. "What farmland?" He pointed to the cloudy shapes in the bowl. "The one that does not belong to the living. Its soil holds the dead, and anything grown there carries their voices. If you take from it, you invite their pain into your body." Emeka groaned again, curling on the mat. Chief Okari leaned forward. "If we do not act soon, the voices will not stop. And once they settle inside his spirit, they will never leave." Ngozi's hands tightened around her wrapper. She didn't care what it took. Whatever this curse was, it had to be broken, before it swallowed her husband whole. Chief Okari's voice dropped to a heavy whisper as he continued, his gaze fixed on the swirling water in the clay bowl. "The yam and beans you cooked were not ordinary. They came from the farm of the dead." Ngozi's brows knitted in confusion. "Farm of the dead?" He nodded slowly. "Many years ago, during the war, a battle swept through a nearby village. The soldiers had no time to bury the bodies properly. They dug a shallow trench and threw them in, men, women, and children. The land was later sold, and a farmer unknowingly planted crops over it. But the earth remembers what it holds, and the spirits of those buried there, especially the children, cannot rest." Ngozi shivered, the image sending a chill deep into her bones. Chief Okari's tone grew darker. "At night, when food from that land is cooked, the spirits cry out. The children's voices are the loudest, for they were taken before their time. The boiling brings back their pain, their hunger, their confusion. They cry because they do not understand why they were left in the dark." Emeka groaned again on the mat, pressing his palms hard into his stomach. "They're still crying," he muttered weakly. Ngozi clasped his hand tightly. "Can't they be silenced?" she asked, her voice trembling. "They do not want silence," Chief Okari replied firmly. "They want to be heard. They want to be found. Every time their food is cooked, they try to speak. But no one listens, until now." Ngozi's mind raced. She remembered the sound in the yam, the whispers in the beans calling her name. It was as if they had chosen her to carry their message. Chief Okari leaned back, his eyes heavy with unspoken memories. "If you ignore them, the curse will spread. Anyone who eats from that land will suffer the same fate, voices in their belly, pain that no medicine can cure, and nights without rest. The dead will not stop until they are given peace." Ngozi knew then that cooking from that farm again was inevitable, only this time, it would not be for eating. It would be for ending this. Chief Okari's eyes locked on Ngozi's, his voice steady but heavy with warning. "The only way to end this is to listen to them, and then let them go. You must cook from that land one last time. But it must be done under the moonlight, and you must call the names of the children buried there." Ngozi's stomach tightened. "I don't know their names." "You will," he said, handing her a small pouch filled with strange-smelling herbs. "When you light the fire, sprinkle this. Their voices will come, and they will tell you who they are." That night, under a pale, swollen moon, Ngozi set up a clay stove in the open yard behind the herbalist's hut. Emeka lay nearby, weak but awake, his eyes following her every move. She poured water into the pot, dropped in the yam and beans from the cursed farm, and sprinkled the herbs. Almost immediately, the air grew cold. At first, there was only the bubbling of the water. Then came the faint cries, soft, pitiful, like babies in the distance. Ngozi's heart pounded, but she forced herself to stand close, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Tell me your names." The cries sharpened. One by one, voices, small, innocent, spoke. Chika. Amara. Namdi. Adiz. Obina. The list grew longer, each name piercing the night. Ngozi repeated them aloud, her voice growing steadier. The pot rattled violently, steam bursting out in thick clouds. The cries rose higher, mingling into wails so loud it felt as if they were coming from the sky itself. Trees shivered in the wind, even the crickets fell silent. Ngozi's voice fought against the noise, calling every name until her throat ached. Then, the sound shifted, no longer desperate, but almost relieved. The steam thinned, and the pot went still. Ngozi stood there, chest heaving, sweat and tears mixing on her face. Chief Okari stepped forward, his expression solemn. "They have heard you. And now the village will hear them, for the last time." But deep in her chest, Ngozi felt the weight of their voices still clinging to her, as if they had left a part of themselves behind. The night air grew unnaturally still, as if the earth itself was waiting. Ngozi stood by the pot, her breath coming fast, the children's names still on her lips. Suddenly, without warning, the pot shook violently, the lid clattering to the ground. A loud crack echoed, and the clay split open on its own, spilling the steaming yam and beans onto the bare earth. Ngozi stumbled back, her heart pounding, but before she could react, a rush of cold wind swept around her, curling through her hair and wrapping around her body. From that wind came voices, not just crying now, but speaking, layered and echoing, as though 100 whispers were merging into one. "Ngozi, hear us," the voices pleaded. They were small, fragile, yet filled with an ache that pierced through her chest. She swallowed hard. "I hear you," she whispered into the night. The voices swelled, overlapping. "Tell them, tell the village, we are here. Beneath the soil. We are cold. We are hungry. We were never given our rest." Her throat tightened as she glanced toward Chief Okari, who stood silent, his eyes closed, listening. "Where?" she asked, her voice shaking. The wind circled her again, and the voices answered as one. "In the old cassava field, beyond the river bend. The ground that grows too fast, the ground that never dries. That is where they left us." Ngozi's eyes burned with tears. She could almost see them now, small, shadowy figures with hollow eyes, their tiny hands reaching toward her. "I will tell them," she promised, her voice breaking. "You will not be forgotten." The cold wind slowed, the voices softening into faint hums. "Thank you," they whispered before fading into the night. Ngozi stood frozen, the cracked pot at her feet, steam drifting into the moonlight. Her promise now felt like a heavy chain, because once morning came, she would have to stand before the entire village and reveal a truth that had been buried for decades, and she knew not everyone would want those bodies found. Morning came heavy with gray clouds, as if the sky itself knew what was about to happen. Ngozi stood in the village square, her voice steady but her hands trembling as she told the elders everything, the crying food, the whispers, the names, and the place where the children lay. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd, some faces pale with shock, others dark with shame. The elders sent word to every household, and by evening, the whole village had gathered at the old cassava field beyond the river bend. Men carried shovels, women brought white cloth, and the children were told to stay far away. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something older, deeper, that made the skin crawl. When the digging began, the ground gave way too easily, as if it had been waiting. One by one, small bones surfaced, wrapped in the tatters of what had once been clothes. The women wept openly, and even the strongest men lowered their heads. Chief Okari led the prayers, his deep voice trembling as he called on God to grant the little ones peace. The bodies were wrapped in fresh white cloth and placed side by side in a wide grave. Palm fronds were laid over them, and the people sang softly, songs of rest, songs of homecoming. Ngozi stood at the edge, tears streaming down her face, whispering the names she had learned under the moonlight. When the last mound of earth was patted down, a gentle breeze swept across the field, warm and sweet, as if the land itself was sighing in relief. From that day, no one ever heard food cry again. The yams boiled in silence, the beans cooked without whispers, but Ngozi never lit a fire after dark. She kept to daylight cooking, the memory of that night forever etched in her mind. In the years that followed, mothers warned their daughters with hushed voices, "Food remembers what the earth hides." And whenever someone passed the cassava field, they walked quietly, knowing the ground now held peace where it once held pain.